The Haftarah for Yom Kippur morning from Isaiah, this call to deal bread to the hungry, to bring out the poor, to clothe the naked, to break the bonds of slavery. All should go free. It is a different kind of embrace and a different kind of hug. And the Jewish tradition, in its genius, has, again, this arc of the high holidays. It starts with intense introspection, and almost in concentric circles, it continues to go wider and wider and include more and more and more. Larger family, until as we near the end of Yom Kippur, the concern is not so much on oneself, but on what we can do to enrich and to uplift the lives of others, our community as a whole and our world as a whole. And the Haftarah in some way reminds the Jew of the eternal tension that exists between Jewish concern for humanity as a whole, what's often called the universal concern, and concern specifically for the Jewish people, what's often called a particularistic concern. Is there a tension? Is there ever almost a battle between the extent to which Jews care for the world as a whole or the Jewish people in particular? From the Jewish tradition's perspective, there should never be a conflict. There should never be a need to worry about the extent to which one is concerned about either the Jewish people or the world. The Jewish tradition believes that every community, every family, every people learns what it is to care about humanity as a whole by caring about their own family. That's the fundamental Jewish embrace. The fundamental Jewish embrace is, if you really understand who your parents are, and the Jewish tradition always begins with parents. Remember, the commandment is honor thy father and mother. And to the rabbis, it is first of all, it is the one commandment that never ever ends. Even after a parent passes, one is supposed to honor the parent by reciting Kaddish, by lighting a Yortzeit candle, by remembering the parent every single day. It comes back to last night. As long as we remember a parent, we remain a child, and that parent remains our parent forever. Our parents live until we are no longer here. But the idea of the Jewish tradition is that out of understanding what it is to have a relationship with one's parents, and then one's siblings, and then one's aunts and uncles, and then one's cousins, one is to have an embrace of all humanity. And there should never be a tension for a Jew who says, well, where do I put my efforts? Into specific Jewish concerns or into concerns of humanity as a whole? And again, it's so easy for anybody who has this opportunity to talk about the Jewish tradition to a group of people. It's so easy to tell, well, I will now tell you what to do. Nobody should tell anybody else what to do. All we can do is try to learn from what our tradition has to say, and then each of us decides the extent to which it makes sense to us or not, the extent to which we want to incorporate it into our lives or not. It is amazing that the Jew, for all of the need to be concerned about the Jewish people, how the Jew has tended to be in the forefront of almost every social movement that has ever moved society forward. The Jew is innately obsessed with breaking the bonds of slavery, no matter who the slave is, of feeding the hungry, no matter who the poor is, of clothing the naked, of housing, of education. of health care. The Jew has been in the forefront of every attempt to basically hug the world. And the only thing that the Jew always has to struggle with, although it's not meant to be a struggle, just it is the way life works out, is to how much time, how much energy, and how much money go into specific Jewish concerns. And there are certain truths of life which we all know. The Jewish people are a very, very, very small minority of people on this earth. Somewhere around 2%, maybe. And if Jews don't care for the Jewish people will simply disappear. And if the Jews disappear, it will be a very, 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 it'll be such a shame. If there's no more Yom Kippur, no more Rosh Hashanah, no more Pesach, no more Shabbat, no more Isaiah, no more Choose Life, and no more It's Not in Heaven, it would just be really sad. It wouldn't be the end, hopefully. But for the Jewish community, for the Jewish people to sustain itself, the Jew must be very much involved with Jewish life. Jewish life. How? I don't expect there to be any Orthodox Jew in this room. I'm not suggesting any of us become Orthodox in our observance of Judaism. But one of the things we are always grappling with is there enough Jewish activity in our life to reinforce Jewish identity for ourselves and our children and our family and our extended family and our grandchildren? And are we establishing Jewish identities which will embrace our children's children's children? And it has much more to do with young families. You know, so many of us in this room, we've had our families. Many of us are lucky enough to be grandparents, and grandparents have an extraordinary opportunity to help shape the grandchildren's identity. But it's really about young parents who are trying to decide what's the style of the Jewish life that they have in their home. And to what extent are they teaching their children and their grandchildren? And to what extent are they sharing in a community of their own, with friends, their peers, Jewish concerns? And it is really wonderful the extent to which Jews will be at the forefront of movements. They will be at rallies. They will be at marches that in many ways symbolize the critical issues that should be capturing everyone's attention on the globe. At the same time, there are also we live in an age where suddenly there are very important Jewish challenges to Jewish life. There is, and you've seen it, there is anti-Semitism spreading through Western Europe that one could not have ever imagined after the Shoah. And every now and then it seeps into something here in America. The extent to which do we, contemporary Jews, to what extent do we fight it? Do we lend our voice in those moments as well? And that's the tension. There's only so much time. There's only so much energy, only so much concern. The rabbis just plead with us to understand it starts with Jewish concern. Avi Weiss, who's one of the great rabbis of our generation, a modern Orthodox rabbi, who has been at the forefront of social action for an entire generation. I grew up with him, following him. The only time I was ever arrested was with Avi Weiss, protesting in front of the Soviet embassy in New York before the release of Natan Sharansky. And Avi Weiss has a simple principle for contemporary Jews, for us. It's a very powerful message. His message is the following: don't ever do less for your Jewish people than you would do for humanity as a whole. Don't ever do less for Jews than what you would do for people in general. It starts with how you care and embrace your fellow Jew. And one of the things we mention every year, it should be mentioned every year, is that there is an enormously high percentage in the Chavurah of people who are funding, supporting the Jewish Federation. I love it when people come up to me and say they watch Shalom TV or JBS. I had some lovely people today tell me how much they love it. And I think that we've created a channel that is doing extraordinary work to reinforce Jewish identity and to educate and to inform and to create Jewish identity. But the most important organization, arm of Jewish life is the federation system, because the federations are our distribution system. We give the federation funds that they allocate in thoughtful, meaningful, wise ways, which we could never do. We could never decide how to take whatever dollars we have and allocate it to different organizations, to different needs in the community, whether it's Jewish Family Service, whether it's the Jewish Center, whether it's Hebrew High School, whether it's the day school. And they also decide how to allocate funds for the State of Israel and for the Jewish people as a whole. And none of us are going to take whatever donation we make and divide it. So we give it to a body that represents us. They're not a fundraising operation. They're a fund distributing operation. And one of the things that makes me proudest is the extent to which members of the Chavurah have been involved, profoundly involved, in Jewish communal activity, including the Federation, and what a high percentage there is of people who give to the Federation in the Chavurah. But it isn't 100%, and I'm always saddened when it's not 100%. I don't understand. A lot I understand. I don't understand why there's any Jew in any community which does not make some contribution to this allocating body. I can't imagine an argument why any Jew would not want to help aging Jews, lonely Jews, wouldn't want to help educate our children, and adult education study programs as well. I mean, the Chavurah was created with this notion that we will study as adults. When we did this in the 1970s, nobody was doing it. There was no place where Jews could learn on an adult level. Now everywhere you look, there's an attempt. I mean, it's not that we were copied. It was just that the people who created the Chavurah got it earlier than the Jewish community. But there's nothing more important than Jewish education of our young people and of us, we who are adults. And the last thing we want to do is send our kids to school. What we want to do is be a model. We want them to see us studying. It's a never-ending process. Why would there ever be a Jew who wouldn't want to make sure that the allocating organization of the Jewish community had funds to give to day schools and adult education? It makes no logical sense. And so one of the things I always urge you, if you imagine how much you spend a month on television, what your cable bill is, if you imagine how much you spend on one single night out in New York, if you go to a Broadway show today, you got to be a gazillionaire. If you go to a Yankee game, you got to be a gazillionaire. How much are we willing to spend on an evening of entertainment? How could anyone not give at least that much, one night's worth, to the Federation? And that's what's involved here. That's what Yom Kippur leads to. It leads to how are we embracing the Jewish world. And the other thing that has to be said, and in some way I find it amusing to me, there was big controversy this year in the newspapers, in the Anglo-Jewish newspapers. Controversy is the wrong word. There were pieces written discussing the problem rabbis face on the high holidays. What's the big problem? Will rabbis talk about Israel? And there was one piece in the foreword which says, oh, this year rabbis are going out of their way to talk about Israel. A lot of talk about Israel this year in the Hag. Then there's another piece, rabbis are scared to death to talk about Israel at their congregation. And there has been, of late, this sort of reluctance by rabbis to talk about Israel because Israel is such a volatile topic, especially in non-Orthodox congregations. What kind of support do you give the state of Israel? And are passions so high that no matter what position a rabbi takes, there are going to be people in the congregation who are going to be upset. And the only time I even touch on it is at this moment as we're about to close the morning service of Yom Kippur. And I've never been afraid, I'll never be afraid. First of all, the Chavurah is extraordinary in its willingness to think through things. And no one's ever told me what to say or not say, and it's one of the wonderful things about being a rabbi for more than 40 years here. And not only that, we tend to talk about it on adult education on Saturday mornings in Stanford and Sunday evenings in Greenwich. We talk about it all the time. So that many rabbis have a situation where if they don't talk about it on the high holidays, nobody ever gets to hear what they think. In our Chavurot, it's the exact opposite. Everybody understands where I am and what I think, what I try to do is be nuanced. I think one of the tragedies of modern American life, and it is now a tragedy of modern Jewish life, is that people tend to be polarized and take positions which are either or, hard right or hard left. And, you know, it's the adage, don't confuse me with the facts. My mind's already made up. I don't want to discuss it. And this is true in politics, and it's true in Judaism, Jewish life, especially when it comes to Israel. And that I remind you that the Talmud has this fabulous view of how people are to debate with each other. Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. Both positions represent the words of the living God. And therefore you listen to another person with respect even if you disagree with them. There is so much self-righteousness in America today, in American politics today. So much self-righteousness in the Jewish world today. It is so un-Jewish to do. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the name Jonathan Haidt. He's a Jewish professor at NYU. And he does fabulous work in the field of moral psychology. And he's written a number of books, but one book, if you ever have a chance and you're in a library or you see it, you should just pick it up a little bit. It's called The Righteous Mind. The Righteous Mind. And there's a lot in it. And I often want to talk about some of the things he discusses because they turn out to be so Jewish. But one of the things he describes is how people tend to hold the positions they espouse. They basically have an emotional reaction and then do their best to find logical reasons to support whatever emotional position they've already taken. And that it's very hard to find people who have strong feelings but are always open to learning, open to other opinions. And that's part of the hug. Part of the hug is not to dismiss another person because they disagree with us. We don't dismiss somebody because we think they're immoral for the opinions they have politically or about Israel. We are open and we listen and we try to learn. One thing it's not, by the way, it's not about Israel right or wrong. I don't believe anybody in this room is a right or wrong person. In any context, including our children, we adore our children. We hope they only do what we believe is right. And if a child did something really horrible, we would know. And we wouldn't pretend everything the child did was right if the child really did things to hurt other people. If a child did something that got them in trouble, but we would still love them, and we would still hug them, and embrace them. And anybody who says, is critical of another Jew because, oh, you're Israel right or wrong, I don't know any Jew who's Israel right or wrong. What happens is ultimately Jews take certain positions on what Israel is doing domestically, but most importantly, most often has to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Jews need to have humility. When we do the silent prayer and I read it out loud, and one of the early lines is, implant humility in my soul. I love that line. Jews are not innately humble. And one place Jews are rarely humble is their view of what Israel ought to do, especially when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There's no humility. And by humility I mean there is no honest recognition of how woefully, woefully, woefully ignorant we are. Woefully, woefully ignorant. And that a very small percentage of Jews have ever been to Israel. There is something flagrantly arrogant about thinking we know what Israel should do if we have never been there. To think we understand the Middle East without knowing the geography, the relationship, the ideology that is driving the Arab world, having nothing to do with Israel, is a sign of Jewish arrogance that really should give us enormous pause. The bottom line is, there is a small but enormous group of Islamic extremists. There are 50 billion, is that right? 50 billion or million? That's what I thought. 50 million members of Islam. 90% of that 50 million are not extremists. They're not jihadists. They're not fundamentalists. And we would be wrong to ever lump them in one group. The problem is 10% of a large number is a very large number. And that is who, at the moment, Western civilization is having to confront. And in the midst of this sea is the state of Israel. And they're our family. And they're doing the very best they can. And they're doing extraordinary things in ways that make us so proud. And they have a society which is embracing and hugging Jew, Christian, Muslim, and Arab. It is not a perfect society. But if there's one thing that this season calls upon us to do, is hug our family as strongly and as tightly as we possibly can. And part of that involves a commitment to the state of Israel. And so as we decide, where do we take our next trip? It is just too bad that every Jew in the world does not at one point or another land at Ben Gurion Airport and share Israel with people they love. And that there is an understanding of how much we don't know. And that in a free, democratic society, the people who make the decisions and whose lives are on the line in ways that ours are in no way, they deserve our support as they work out, and we have every right, by the way, to have opinions of our own, but as they work out what it means to create their own hug among themselves and in the region in which they live. That's the message of the Haftarah. The message of the Haftarah is that the Jew must, at one and the same time, be as embracing of the Jewish people as possible and the state of Israel, while never forgetting that we are part of a larger world, and anything we can do to uplift that world as well, as the prophet says, to loose the fetters, to break the yoke. That is what we must do in the year we're about to begin together, and we all say, Amen.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.